Right, now in the 17th and 18th chapters, for the most part up until this point anyway, the Gita has been using this method of a threefold analysis based on the three gunas of sattva, rajas and tamas. At the start of 18 there was a bit of a break from that due to Arjuna's question about renunciation of action, the nature of action, which Krishna spoke about at some length, analysing action. But up until this point, really, starting from chapter 17 verse 7, he's given us 10 categories of existence, which he's analysed in relation to the three gunas, starting off in chapter 17 verse 8 actually with food, then the Vedic ritual yajna, then tapas, which Krishna redefined actually what tapas actually means, and then dana, charity, in chapter 17. Then in chapter 18, that's 4 or 5, the fifth category was renunciation itself, based on Arjuna's question. Then he, as Krishna had been talking about the nature of action, he went on to discuss the three key components of action, again in relation to the three gunas, those three components of action being jnana, the knowledge, the understanding that gives rise to a particular mode of action, then the action itself, karma, and then the performer of the action, the kartri, the person who does it. Again, each of these analysed and described in relation to the predominating guna of sattva, rajas or tamas. Then last time we were here, it went on to buddhi, which is the intellect or the understanding that one has of the world and of the things as they are, and then dhriti, the determination or the resolution with which one undertakes action, or in the case of tamas, the lack of resolution, which leads to sleeping and laziness there. And we saw that, generally speaking, across them, the sattvic category is related to spiritual pursuits. Let me just have a look, see if anyone has. Sound great. Thank you very much. Very kind. Okay, well, the sound is on. Yeah, the sattvic is related to spiritual pursuits. In relation to dhriti, it said the yoga practice is sattvic determination, commitment to performing yoga. The rajasic category related to worldly actions based on desire and aspiration for worldly success, whereas tamasic category is about indolence, laziness, foolishness, illusion, stupidity, lack of knowledge, like that. And that's the theme really that runs over. So we've had 10 so far, 10 analyses based on the gunas, and now we come to the last one in verse 36 of chapter 18, which is sukha, which means pleasure, happiness, enjoyment that we may experience. So Krishna begins in verse 36, introducing that topic. Sukham tvidanim trividam shrinu me bharatarshava. Shrinu me. Shrinu, listen now, hear from me. Shrinu me. It's an imperative of the verb to hear, as in shruti, etc. So listen to me. Sukham tvidanim. Now about happiness, about sukha, which also is trividam. Shrinu me bharatarshava. Bharatarshava, the greatest of the Bharatas, Bharata Rishabha. Abhyasa Ramate Yatra. Yatra, by which abhyasad, as a result of regulated adherence to it. It's a word that's used in relation to yoga, of course. Abhyas is what Krishna says, and also the Yoga Sutras uses the word in terms of committed practice, regular adherence to it. So by regular adherence to the pursuit of happiness, ramate, one finds pleasure. Ramate, one enjoys things. Dukantam cha nigachtiti, and one nigachtiti means to reach or to attain. What does one attain through the pursuit of happiness? Logically enough, dukkha antam. Anta means the end, dukkha means suffering, the end of suffering. Now, I would suggest that what Krishna has in mind here when he uses that phrase, sorry, I'll try and lean back without disappearing, dukkantam, that must be the sattvic happiness, because it's only by means of finding happiness in relation to sattva that dukkanta is actually achieved. Because when happiness is pursued in relation to rajas or tamas, there's some temporary form of enjoyment perhaps, but it's not dukkanta. So I think that last phrase that Krishna uses, dukkantam cha nigacchati, he reaches, is in relation to verse 37, which is a happiness focused on sattva, or inspired by the sattvic disposition. So what does Krishna say about that? And again, that same pattern is present. Sattva is in relation to spiritual pursuits. And again, I've made this point before. Someone, oh yeah, it was in the Yoga Sutras course that I'm tutoring, someone raised the question about sattva. And again, the point is there, sattva is one of the gunas. And Krishna says in chapter 14, I think verse 7 or 8, Sukha Sangena Badnati, the sattva guna, Badnati, it does bind us through attachment to pleasure. So it's a binding factor, but also, as we're seeing here, its other identity is as a liberating factor. So sattva guna is like the bridge, the ladder that carries us across from the material domain into the spiritual. And of course, as Patanjali points out, when one attains that spiritual position, then sattva also can be set aside. But without sattva, there is no crossing over to the spiritual mode of existence. Okay, what does Krishna say then about the happiness that is derived from the sattvic disposition? Yattadagre, this is verse 37, Yattadagre vishyamiva pariname mritopamam tatsukam sattvikam praktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Now, the first line is Yattadagre. Agra, apart from being a town about 120 miles south of Delhi, probably a city actually, because of Taj Mahal, but it means in the beginning, or the beginning, and Agre means in the beginning. That which in the beginning, Vishamiva, Visham is poison, something very painful. That which in the beginning is like poison. Pariname mritopamam. Parinama means transformation, change. It means finally, in the end, in the conclusion. Pariname mritopamam. Amrita upama is the same as the sweetest nectar. Ambrosia, sometimes translated as amrita. It literally means deathless. Amrita, it's the nectar of immortality, but it means something very sweet, something essentially flavoursome. So the sattvic joy is that which in the beginning stage, when one starts out, is like poison. It's bitter, it's hard, but the end result is fantastic, wonderful, pure joy. Amritodbhavam, amritopamam, just like Amrita. Tatsukam sattvikam praktam, that happiness which in the beginning is tough, but in the end is so joyful and enriching. That is tatsukam sattvikam praktam. That praukta, that is said to be sattvic, of the nature of sattva. And then Krishna says a little bit more about exactly what this form of happiness is. Atma buddhi prasadajam. So why is this pursuit of happiness under the auspices of sattva? Why is it Vishamiva? Why is it like poison at the beginning? The answer is because it involves renunciation of the mundane pursuits of pleasure, the things that we've been brought up and conditioned to believe in as true sources of happiness: consumption, more possessions, more prosperity, more wealth, more reputation, all those things. This sattvic sukha means giving those up, and that's hard for us because we like those things. They're what we've been taught to seek in life. Our schools, our parents, our culture, our economic system: buy this, enjoy this. And we're mindlessly staring and being brainwashed by that. So when we come to try and adopt the search for internal enlightenment that involves going beyond those ordinary, dull, mundane places, at first that's hard. I think one of the commentators, maybe Shankara, says also it's to do with the yoga practice, meditation, which is very difficult at first, fixing the mind every day. It's a tough endeavor. So it's Vishamiva, but the result, when the internal pleasure, when the joy of spiritual awakening and enlightenment begins to become manifest, then amritopamam, then that is the sweetness, the greatest pleasure that exceeds the other forms of pleasure that we get from the mundane world has to offer us. And Krishna then defines it a little more in his final phrase, Atma Buddhi Prasada Jam. So Jam, it means born of, arising from. It's the verb to be born, to take birth. And what does it arise from? Atma Buddhi Prasada. Now, prasada, of course, it means mercy or grace, as if we go to the temple, we're given food that's been offered. That's prasad. But prasad in the Gita more frequently has the meaning of serenity. Also, Patanjali in Yoga Sutras uses it in this sense as one of the states that is achieved through successful yoga practice. Serenity, prasad, a state of mind that is tranquil, undisturbed, that observes the changing fortunes of life and is not disturbed by them. It transcends, what is it, the slings of what does Hamlet say? I've forgotten. Of outrageous fortune. I'm sure someone will remember that. But the vicissitudes of life, the transformations that lift us up and cast us down, that Atma Buddhi Prasada, that serenity of mind which looks upon the world without being disturbed. Now, Atma Buddhi, what does that mean? Well, we've heard Buddhi is the intellect, the highest part of the mind, and the commentators are not convinced. Even Shankaracharya gives two different interpretations. He says it can mean Atma in the general sense of one's own buddhi, the serenity of one's own buddhi, one's own mind, intellect. But he also says it can mean, Atma Buddhi can mean when the buddhi is fixed on the Atman, when it's absorbed not in the external world but in the internal existence of Atma. That could be Atma Buddhi Prasada, the serenity that comes from spiritual awakening. But we can see again, the point is that when Krishna talks about sattva and he talks about the sukha that is derived from sattva, that is shaped by sattva, it's about spirituality. It is about a withdrawal from the mundane, pale pleasures of the world, looking within for the pleasure of the self, Atma Buddhi Prasada, that serenity of mind that comes from spiritual awakening. And that is the sattvic sukha, the sattvic joy of life, the real highest joy that any living being can experience. Okay, and as always, we take a step down now. And Krishna says, Vishwayendriya Samyoga. This is, of course, verse 38. Vishwayendriya Samyoga Yattadagre Mritopamam Pariname. Vishamiva, Tatsukam Raja Samsmitam. Tatsukam Raja Samsmitam. Smita, often it means remember, but it also means recognized, understood. So this pleasure, Tatsukam Raja Samsmitam, is recognized as Rajas, based on the guna of Rajas. And what does Krishna say about it? First of all, he defines at the beginning, Vishwayendriya Samyoga. But let's look at the next phrase. Yat tadagre mritopamam. That which agre, in the beginning, amritopamam. Is that right? Vishwayendriya Samyogad Yat tadagre mritopamam. It is, yes. Amrita opamam, equal to nectar in the beginning. Yat tadagre, Vishwayendriya Samyogad Yat tadagre mritopamam. But Pariname Vishamiva. Parinama, in the state of transformation, change, in the end, Vishamiva. It becomes just like poison. So it's the opposite way around. And that's because the Rajas Sukha is, as Krishna says at the beginning there, Vishwayendriya Samyogat. It means the ending art, it's ablative, it means because of, due to, from. And so this pleasure arrives from what? Vishwaya Endriya Samyoga. Samyoga means, as perhaps you recognize, it means uniting, coming together, as the word yoga actually means, samyoga, coming together. And what are coming together? Vishwaya and Indriya. Vishwaya is the objects that we experience through the senses. Indriya is the senses. So when the senses unite with their objects, in other words, when the ear hears pleasant sounds, when the touch sensation has delightful touches, when we smell pleasing aromas, taste tasty food or see wonderful sights, etc. That is Vishwayendriya Samyoga. That is the coming together of the sense and the object it perceives, which gives us pleasure in the beginning. So Vishwayendriya Samyogat Yattadagre Amritopamam. It's equal to Amrita, to nectar, but Pariname Vishamiva. In the end, it becomes something like poison. It really means it's suffering in the end. It causes us disturbance. And why is that? A number of reasons. First of all, if we've based our life around pursuit of sensual or sensory pleasures, then ultimately it comes to an end, and we become frustrated as older people. Why can't I do that anymore? Why can't I experience that anymore? Why can't I enjoy through the senses in the same way that I used to when I was a young fellow, my lad? Also, I think because ultimately all such pleasures are frustrating. They're never as good as we think they or hope they are going to be. It leaves us with a sense of emptiness. I think it was it reminds me of it was a Roman emperor, Septimius Severus, who rose up. He joined the Roman army at the junior level. He got to be a general, a commander, and then eventually he became the emperor. It's about 250 CE, I think. His dying words were, "Omnia fui nihil expedit." I achieved everything, but it was all nothing in the end. He gained more than any man in a material sense could ever hope to achieve, and yet his final verdict was nihil expedit. It was just nothing at all. It wasn't worth it. So, and that, I think that example perfectly illustrates the point that is being made here. In the beginning, when Severus became the emperor, Amritopamam, it was delightful, but in the end, it was just nothing. Nihil expedit Vishamiva. It was just like poison. He was a frustrated man. And I think that applies to all of those of us who strive for satisfaction in life through Vishwayendriya Samyoga, through sensory pleasures. It doesn't work. It's that frustrating, like a child on Boxing Day when you've opened all your piles of presents and really wasn't that great. After, all through December, you're looking at the parcels around the tree and you think it's going to be so great, and it's not. It's always a bit of a letdown, that sort of feeling, and that's why Krishna says, and also these billionaires now, they're all jetting off into space, desperately finding there must be something else. I've got everything on earth, maybe I'll find the satisfaction I crave by going up in a spaceship or something like that. But it's ultimately Vishamiva. It's never as good as it was hoped to be. So therefore Krishna says Vishayendriya Samyogat Yattadagre Mritopamam. It's good at first, Pariname Vishamiva, but then it's Vishamiva. It's empty, it's disturbing, it's actually a source of unhappiness. Vishamiva. Tatsukam Raja Samsmritam. That pleasure is Rajas. Okay, and now Krishna moves on, of course, as he always does, to tamas, and the pleasure derived under the influence of tamas, which is yadagre chanu bande cha sukam mohanam atmanaha. Yadagre, that which in the beginning, yadagre chan and anubande, both in the beginning and in the end, sukam mohanam atmanaha. This pleasure, mohanam atmanaha, covers the atman, the spiritual self, in a state of illusion. Mohanam, it's delusion, stupidity, foolishness, and it covers the atman ever more deeply, so that it's almost lost. It's what the Isha Upanishad says is Atmahan. It destroys the soul, in the sense that it covers it so deeply that it's almost imperceptible. It's covered by layers, kantuka, as the Shaivite teachings say, cloaks, coverings of delusion, so that the spiritual spark within, the spark of wisdom, the spark of enlightenment, is covered over by delusion. Sukam mohanam atmanaha. And how does this become manifest? Nidralasya pramadotam. Is that right? Nidralasya pramadotam. It's nidra, sleepiness, alasya, laziness, pramad. I think that's right. Pramad is stupidity, foolishness. Let me just check that. Nidralasya pramadotam. Is that right? Nidralasya. Yep, pramadotam. Through sleep, laziness, and delusion, stupidity, and these things are. This is the way that the tamas influences to find pleasure. Can't be bothered to do anything. Laziness. I'll just do nothing all the time, and that delusion covers the soul ever more deeply, covers the atman ever more deeply. So therefore it said yadagre chanu bande cha sukam mohanamatmanaha nidra alasya pramadotam tamasam udahritam. That is said to be tamas, of the nature of tamas, udahritam. That's what it's said to be. So again, we've got there the last of the 11 threefold analyses of most of the facets of our own lives and the lives of all people. And it's the same pattern again. The sattvic pleasure is the spiritual awakening. The rajasic pleasure is sensory pleasure, enjoyments of the objects of this world. And tamasic is just delusion, folly, laziness, indolence, stupidity, etc. That covers up, completely covers up any spiritual spark that might be arising within a sukam mohanam atmanaha. Okay, now then, having concluded his really concluded his discussion of the gunas. We've 36, 37, 38, 39. Verse 40, Krishna makes a point here. Natadasti pritivyamba divideveshu va punaha sattvam prakriti jayar muktam yadebihi shatribir gunai. Natadasti pritivyamba. There is not this pritivyamba either on earth. Prithvi is the earth. Pritivyam means on the earth. Divi means in the heavens, in the higher worlds. Deveshu, amongst the gods. So neither on this world, Pritivyam, nor Divi Deveshu, nor in the heavens amongst the highest living beings of existence, again, Sattvam Prakriti Jair Muktam Yadebihi Shat Tribir Gunai. Sattva, it means in this context a form of existence. Muktam means free. What is it free from? Sattvam Prakriti Jair Muktam Yadebihi Tribir Gunai. That is mukta, that is free from these three gunas that are born of Prakriti. So Krishna is saying that nowhere in this world, from the lowest forms of life, even to the highest forms of life in this world, the higher beings of this world, either on earth or in the heavens, all living beings here are under the influence, under the compulsion of the three gunas. There is no liberation from within this world. You might say, well, what about the great sadhus, the yogins, etc.? But they're not in this world anymore. They're physically present perhaps on earth, but their existence is transcendent. Any living being who is a part of this world is still under the control of these three gunas. So nowhere in this world, Pritivyamba, either on this earth, Divideveshu, or in the heavens amongst the gods, nobody is mukta from Ebihi Tribir Gunair, which are Prakritija, which are born of Prakriti, because everything in this world is formed of Prakriti, of matter, and the gunas are inherent qualities of matter. They're like, what's the example given? The blueness of the blue lotus. The blue lotus never is bereft or never loses its blueness, because as soon as it does, it ceases to be a blue lotus. You know, you might say, well, it fades, then it's not a blue lotus anymore, it's a dead lotus. So in the same way, the gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas, are inextricable qualities, attributes, features of Prakriti. So whatever form of existence we achieve in this world, still those three gunas will affect, shape, influence our lives. But of course, always bearing in mind that the sattva guna provides the narrow pathway to escape from Prakriti towards liberation. Sattva guna is the path to moksha, to mukta, as it's said here. So, natadasti pritivyamba, divideveshu va punaha, or again in heaven amongst the gods, divideveshu va punaha, sattvam prakriti jayar gunai, sattvam prakriti jayar gunai, yedebihi shatribir gunai. That is not, I've said that wrong, haven't I? Sorry. Mind not functioning. What is that? Natadasti pritivyamba divideveshu va punaha sattvam prakriti jayar muktam yadebihi shatribir gunai. Nowhere is anything mukta from these three gunas that are the essential attributes of Prakriti, of matter. And that really, at that point now, that marks a break in the teachings, and Krishna now turns his attention, not exactly a complete break, but he uses that idea that he's expressed there in what is it? Is it verse 40? 44, isn't it, that he's expressed in verse 44. He takes that point now and he builds it, and what he's going to do for the remainder of the 18th chapter, leading up to the conclusion, is recapitulate, summarize for us, as any good essay writer must do, summarize for us the main points that have been made throughout the Gita, and therefore he begins with the Karma Yoga. And we'll remember, some of us will remember, some years ago now, when we looked at chapter 2 and chapter 1, we started off with Krishna saying to Arjuna that it is his duty, his dharma, to act as a kshatriya, to fulfill the kshatriya dharma, fighting, defending, using his martial prowess for the sake of dharma, dharmyam sangramam, this dharmic battle that he has to fight to vanquish evil. And from that point, then he developed that point to give us the idea of a karma yoga, whereby one performs one's duties in the world, acts selflessly on behalf of other living beings to protect them, to give them succor, to give them sustenance, without any hint of selfish desire, no desire for personal gain, no desire for reputation, detached and serene. One performs it. Why? Because, as Krishna said earlier in that nice little word he used, kartavyam, because it is proper that you should do it. You act for the welfare of other living beings, kartavya, because that is the proper thing to do. And that is the essence of karma yoga, and that was the beginning of the spiritual path that Krishna has outlined for us. So now he takes that that pattern of teaching related to the gunas, he applies it to the varna system, and he therefore is thereby able to lead us back towards the teachings on karma yoga. But as we'll see, maybe not this week, but maybe next week, with a slight tweak, a little difference. But let's see what he says. He said that there's nowhere in this world that is free of the gunas, whether it's on earth here or amongst the elevated beings of the heavens. All are affected, afflicted, controlled by the influence of the gunas. Now he says, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Visham, Shudranam cha Parantapa, Karmani pravibhaktani svabhava prabhavayar gunai. Gunai, the last word, shows the continuity with the previous discussion of the influence of the gunas. So what's he talking about now? Brahmana, Kshatriya, Visham, Shudranam cha Parantapa. Of the Brahmins, of the Kshatriyas, Visham, of the Vaishya Varna, Shudranam cha Parantapa, and also of the Shudras Parantapa. It's a vocative to address Arjuna. It means one who burns up the foe, Parantapa, scorcher of the foe, you might say. So Brahmana, Kshatriya, Visham, Shudranam cha Parantapa, Karmani pravibhaktani, the activities, the duties, karmani, pravibhaktani, the designated duties, the divisions of duties, pravibhaktani, the designated karmas of these four varnas, karmani pravibhaktani, svabhava prabhavayar gunai, based on the qualities that are born of their inherent nature. Now this is interesting because Krishna clearly here is referring to the ancient Varna system, the division of society into four distinctive social classes. And Krishna's as I mentioned this before, back in chapter 4, Chaturvanyam Maya Srishtam, that I set this fourfold division in place in the beginning of it. Now, what does it actually mean? Many modern writers I see, and it irritates me slightly. I'm not, usually I manage a bit of prasad, serenity, but when I see that, what they do is they equate Varna with caste, and it's not at all. It's something It's not entirely different because they're both social groupings, social classes. But Varna isn't caste. And as we see here, where Krishna uses the phrase Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai, they arise from the qualities that are shaped by Swabhav, one's inner nature. Now, caste, by and large, almost universally, is designated by birth. You are born as a certain caste, and that remains as your identity throughout life. Moreover, I don't know how many castes there are. I think there's something like 300-400, maybe more. But there are only 4 Varnas, so there's distinctive differences here. And what I think is the point is making about Svabhava Prabhava Guna, the qualities that are born of your inner nature, what that indicates is that these 4 classes are not merely a social division, they are 4 types of Swabhava, 4 types of characters of people, 4 innate tendencies that we find within humanity. Some people, some individuals are, by their very nature, by their swabhav, they are drawn towards studying, reading all the time, and they are intellectually inclined. They're disinclined, and this is important as well, towards financial aggrandizement. They're not interested in stuffing their pockets with money and accumulating great wealth. They're absorbed in intellectual pursuits. And this isn't just about the family you were born in, although it's often the case that it is influenced by that, but it's Swabhava Prabhavair Guna. It's the qualities that arise because of one's inner nature. Similarly, there are some people who have a natural disposition towards governance, towards leadership. They are natural leaders. They have that nature which takes them in that direction. They become the leaders and protectors of society. The Kshatriyas, others are inclined towards business and farming activities, agricultural pursuits. That's their natural propensity. We see that a lot in the world. People have a natural propensity for business. If a Brahmin, an intellectual, you might say, tries to do a bit of business, very often it doesn't work at all. It's rare to find these sort of intellectuals who can manage a business, because they're always thinking about things philosophically and not planning the next deal and things like that. And finally, there are those who have Shudras sometimes are looked down on, but in many cases Shudras are skilled people who have a particular craft, artists, designers of buildings, wonderful wood carvers. You see them in India, don't you? Go in Tamil Nadu and Mahabalipuram, you walk around there, fantastically skilled people who've been to a college they have there for stone carvers, and they produce the most amazing, wonderful products that you can get there. And so the Shudra is one who's skilled, artisans, maybe a dancer, an actor, a performer, a reciter. They have certain type of skills that they are able to utilize in pursuing a particular trade, carpenters, builders, architects, etc. And that's the Shudras. So what is being said here is that, as a generalization, human beings can be divided up into these 4 broad categories of types of different people. Now, and therefore society reflects human nature, and that's where Krishna is you can see where he's going with this now. He's taking this idea of guna, which is the qualities that people have within them that affects and shapes their nature, their swabhav, and that in turn directs the role that they play in society. So therefore Krishna says Brahmana, Kshatriya, Visham, Shudranam cha Parantapa, karmani pravibhaktani svabhava prabhavaya gunai. Now, I've perhaps painted a rather rosy picture of what is being said here, because there's a clear implication that the Brahmin group, those who are by nature, by quality, by disposition, by swabhav, are Brahminical. They're influenced by sattva. And bear in mind, the key attribute of those who have the Brahmin nature is their disinterest in the accumulation of wealth. So if you find someone who claims to be a Brahmin, this is what Krishna's saying, not me, but at the same time is avaricious, greedy, oppressive of others, then they don't have the swabhava Brahmin that Krishna designates here, because an essential attribute of those who are Brahmins is a lack of avarice, a lack of greed, a lack of desire for wealth. It doesn't matter what family you were born in. If you don't have that attribute, according to what the Gita says, then you're not a Brahmin as well. And the same thing is said in the Mahabharata. Yudhishthira says it. The Brahmin, in his discussion with the Dharmavyada, the righteous hunter, Bhrigu says the same thing, that if these attributes that are clearly laid out do not appear in one born as a Brahmin, then that person is not a Brahmin. Similarly, if those attributes that Krishna will define now appear in one who is a Shudra, then I consider that person, that Shudra, to be a Brahmin, Yudhishthira says. So, and I think this verse here, the particular phrase that Krishna uses here, confirms that, because for the very obvious reason that this system of 4 varnas and the castes based on birth, it only existed in India. So does that mean that in every other country around the world there could be nobody who could be designated as a Brahmin, nobody could be designated as a Kshatriya? No, these are universal characteristics of human beings, and that's the point that's been made. Svabhava prabhavaya gunai, the qualities that are born of a person's inner nature. Moreover, the Varna system doesn't work in its rigid form anymore. It's a historical, purely historical phenomenon. It wouldn't work in the modern economic system. Nobody is going to, I don't think, I haven't heard of anyone demanding that we change our social structure back and reimpose the Varna system. But nonetheless, what does persist are these different human tendencies towards intellectualism, spirituality, lack of desire, ambition, towards governance, protection, etc., towards business, farming, towards skilled crafts. These attributes are still very much apparent in human society, and it's in that sense that Varna can be said to be universal. In the old sense of a structured society, that's gone. It's neither desirable to reimpose it, nor is it possible. I will just make one point, because then we can pick up on what Krishna says about them next week. The fundamental underlying principle by which, because of which, the Gita advocates the Varna system is that it conduces towards social stability, social order, a social environment that allows every individual protection and allows every individual to flourish. When you have the non-avaricious intellectuals, those who possess spiritual wisdom as the elite group, never exploiting that status for personal gain. When you have righteous individuals governing society, as Krishna will say here, whose duty it is to make sure that every person in that society is properly cared for. When you have business being conducted, farming being conducted in the most successful manner, and when the artisans are producing these wonderful products by their labor, then that produces a flourishing society. And within that flourishing society, there is universal happiness and prosperity. So that's the fundamental point. The underlying point is, how do people act so that everybody is benefited? It's a social system of universal prosperity, universal flourishing. Everybody succeeds and everybody is protected. So although the Varna system is no longer in its original form of any relevance, that fundamental principle is of great relevance. The fact that society should be structured in such a way that it promotes universal good, the good of every living being from the up and down, and it is a society that's led not by the rich, the famous, the pop singers and footballers and whoever it is, the people who appear in these glossy magazines you find in the hairdresser sometimes. No, it's those who possess enlightened wisdom. They are the leaders of society. So, but the fundamental principle is what is most beneficial for all living beings, and it means that working to find the form of society that is most beneficial for all living beings. In the past, in the Mahabharata and Gita times, that was achieved by means of the Varna system. In the modern era, the imperative is to find an alternative system which allows everybody to benefit and prosper. But anyway, that's a bit off the subject, I suppose, really. No, it's not. That's quite relevant, really. But we'll see next time how Krishna actually defines the attributes, the activities of the different varnas in society, which of course then leads into the discussion of karma yoga, the recapitulation of the idea of karma yoga, which we find from verse 46 onwards. But we will pause there, and I'm not going away this week. I'll be back next week. Going away later on in the summer for a couple of weeks, but we'll be back next week, and we can look at a clear delineation that Krishna gives of the four varnas, the qualities, the attributes that define a particular person as a particular type of individual in the fourfold analysis. Okay, well, thanks for listening in again, and we're getting towards the end now, aren't we? But anyway, still got a few weeks to go, so we'll be back next week and we'll push on and see what Krishna says about the Varnas. But thanks for listening, and good night and namaste.